Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday, and welcome to the VagCast, the weekly podcast where we, the Vagilantes, discuss sexual health topics. I'm Katie Danis, and
And I'm Maggie Munt.
and Vaishnavi could not be with us today because she is in Chicago, working on a sexual health grant project, and so we wish her well. And she will probably be on the next episode. But today it's just us. How are we doing, Mags? Are you okay?
Doing all right. It's raining here in Concord, North Carolina.
Yeah.
It's wonderful though. Sitting on the couch with my puppy, and we're just about to talk
Yay!
about some sexual health topics, and we're gonna have a good time.
I'm super excited. Um, we just finished our first year of college. I'm so excited to be done.
Woo!
But sexual health education never rests. And so today we are going to be talking about sexually transmitted infections. So, Max, you want to tell us about sexually transmitted infections?
So, sexually transmitted infections are things that we have been hearing about hopefully, since you're young, whether it's from school or from a family member or a trusted teacher or somebody like that. But they are basically just infections that occur through sexual activity. And contrary to popular belief, it is not always through vaginal sex. It can also be through oral sex, anal sex, any kind of sexual intercourse that is not necessarily what we traditionally define as sex. So we're going to be talking about all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. Yeah, I'm really glad that you bring up the fact that it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be any kind of penetrative sex. It can be sexually transmitted infections, all kinds of them, can be transmitted through oral sex, anal sex. They can be transmitted through penetrative sex, but also some of them can even be transmitted through outer course. So things like dry humping might be considered outer course rather than inner course, and there are certain bugs that can be transmitted that way, but most of them are transmitted through some kind of exchange of bodily fluids or any kind of sexual skin-to-skin contact, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So one of the reasons, yay, STIs, not
Yay.
really. Um, One of the reasons that I thought that we could talk about this topic today is because I read an article from the News and Observer from 2017. So this is the main Charlotte newspaper, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Charlotte, North Carolina newspaper, and it said North Carolina is one of the most sexually diseased states in the U.S. And we have a map here of all 50 states that have kind of STI transmission rates or infection rates by state. And then if you look at North Carolina and any part of the Deep South, what we will call the Bible Belt, they're pretty much consistently the states with the highest STI infection rate. So why, if we could throw out some hypotheses here, why do you think that is?
Um, well, I think a lot of it has to do with, first of all, you said that we're going to address these states as the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it does have to do with the education system. So when I know we've done content talking about this before, but
Right.
the sexual education that we received, or at least that I received growing up, was pretty much abstinence only. And
Yeah.
it was a lot of it, because we are in the South, is due to religious beliefs. So the church believes, or the Christian church believes, that sex should be between a male and a female through marriage and only marriage. And so because the church believes that, even though we have, or we're supposed to be having, a separation of church and state within education and within government
Mm-hmm.
as a whole,
Right.
that does not often happen, or I should say that doesn't always happen, especially with something like sexual education. So in these states that are considered the Bible heavy states, um, we don't get taught how to properly use a condom. We don't get taught how to have safe sex.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to discuss lack of education as a contributing factor in this kind of infectious disease public health context. So we discuss kind of lack of sex education, or really medically accurate, comprehensive sex education, And we've talked about that in regards to our personal experiences on our YouTube channel. But one thing that I was thinking about recently, and I think that you could attest to, is that when we were at boarding school, I heard about in passing a lot of unplanned pregnancies and especially a lot of chlamydia outbreaks specifically. What's stopping people from kind of addressing this problem as a public health issue and then using, actual research to inform policy decisions about sex education? Because I was reading the student handbook the other day, and, as we both well know, any kind of, they even said like not consensual, that's not a word, portmanteau, any kind of consensual sexual touching was considered an expellable offense. So yeah, and it even said like explicitly consensual touching, and then it outlined like oral sex, partial nudity, full nudity as cause for potential expulsion. I was wondering if we could talk about kind of the role of policy decisions in mitigating or failing to mitigate the spread of STIs.
Since that public legislation falls in line with other public schools in the state, they really push heavily home the idea of abstaining from sexual activity of any kind. And so therefore, if they just put an expulsion over all kinds of sexual activity, even if it's consensual, people are still going to be doing it anyways, just as you would do at a regular public high school. People would do it all the time, and that's fine. But when you're suddenly stuck on a campus pretty much 24/7, it makes it really, really difficult to get condoms, to get proper lube, to get just any kinds of emergency contraceptives. Just it makes it really, really difficult to take care of those kinds of things. So, I mean, I think that we need to have a policy change, because it happens, and it's going to continue happening. We're talking about teenagers here. Teenagers are sexually active people most of the time, and it's fine if you're not. It absolutely is fine, as long as you're safe and firm in your options and your choices. So since students are going to be doing this anyways, I think that we need a policy change at that school to teach people about how to properly have safe sex, places that you could potentially go that's off campus, that is safe and clean.
Yeah, I think that you obviously made a lot of really good points there. And I especially like the fact that you addressed public schools specifically, because we could even get into a discussion of public school funding and differences between states. Because one of the trends that I noticed looking at this map from the News and Observer, if I can find it, yeah, here it is that from my reading, and I'm not an expert on anything, I'm just a caffeinated 19-year-old with a laptop, but all of these, I've talked to teachers, I've talked to sexual health experts, and the general consensus seems to be that a lack of funding or lower funding for public school systems, which involves things like paying teachers less, fewer resources in schools, fewer teachers, so you have a higher student-teacher ratio, all seem to be correlated, not causational, but all seem to be at least loosely correlated with the spread of sexually transmitted infections. And so we could talk about that on just a basic socioeconomic level of, okay, well, people who live in areas, affluent areas where public schools are better funded, like the place where I grew up in Connecticut, had super high property taxes and really well funded school systems. I attended an excellent public school for elementary school. And then if you look at the map, and if you look at any other kind of STI map from recent years, you can see that, Connecticut has relatively low STI infection rates, as opposed to somewhere like North Carolina, which has lower property taxes. And I think, oh gosh, I read a statistic somewhere, and I don't remember where it was. North Carolina pays teachers now, public school teachers on average, what Massachusetts paid public school teachers 20 years ago. And I thought that statistic was pretty right. I thought that statistic was fairly alarming. And it made me, it absolutely made me question whether the quality and the accuracy, or we know that the quality and accuracy of sex education, comprehensive sex education, is absolutely linked to school funding and, socioeconomic status of most people in the area. That's, pretty much unquestionable, I would say. But it also made me wonder, how is it linked? Like, what's the complex web of factors that correlates lower infection rates, and then also better, comprehensive sex education, and, paying teachers more of a living wage. So I understand that I'm definitely not an expert on any of these areas, but I do absolutely think it's something to consider.
I definitely get that. My mother is an administrator. She does all of the hiring for a public middle school in the area where I attended. And we got an excellent education. It's a relatively new school. Right. I was in their very opening first class when I was in 6th grade, so it's very new. Not a super old school, which is wonderful because we love new buildings and we love new technology and facilities, and that's also a really important part of educating people, but that's not the point. But so since it's a new school, she's in charge of hiring new people as they come and go. And I've heard my mother talk about teachers who have come to interview that have all come from northern states because it's really hard to find jobs up north because they pay so much better, and because living wages for teachers in the north are so much better. And so they come into the South because teachers are constantly leaving teaching positions in the southern states, North Carolina specifically. My mother says that they are constantly trying to find teachers for certain positions because there's nobody who wants them because they can't get the living wage that they need. And that's not my mother's fault. That's not administrators or principals' faults. That's the fault of the state government. That's not her fault.
Yes.
So they always struggle finding teachers and finding people to work in these schools. And since they don't want to work down here, lots of the time, the teachers that I had at that school and in most of my public schools before NCSM were wonderful, and they were teachers for the most part. There were always teachers who were less than that, not who didn't want to be there and who were just there to try to support themselves, and that's fine if that's what your job is. That's what your job is. But when you don't have to worry about making all of your money, and when you don't have to be in this position of financial insecurity, you have the ability to teach your students at a more comprehensive level and at a level that is, just all around better. So when teachers don't have to worry about these kinds of things, they take the time to teach children about sexual health education. When there are more teachers there, they have the ability to teach people about sexual health education. And so that's a lot of the reasons to why, these southern states don't have this comprehensive sex education, is because we don't have the teachers to do it.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense that, fewer resources kind of incentivizing people to seek jobs elsewhere. So that's a really interesting, frankly, economic perspective on, a public health issue. So thank you so much. I think that was really interesting, and I absolutely learned something. Right. So we talked a lot of it about kind of school policy. And then I think one thing that you said that seemed like a pretty good segue was state governments and the fact that, there aren't really any federal regulations on a sex education curriculum. Not even, the federal government doesn't mandate that sex education, that the sex education students receive even be medically accurate across states. And so, frankly, there's no, I don't want to say common core, because that's like a whole other web of like policy and education that I don't understand. But there's no really national standard for sex education, even the most basic of sex education. And that, seems to be contributing to so many public health issues. And I really wish that we could frame STIs as a public health issue rather than a moral or ethical or partisan issue. I understand that's like a whole other thing. But yeah, that's one thing that I at least continually struggle with is how to, because I understand that I'm playing with a different deck of cards from a lot of people, and that sometimes makes it difficult for us to understand each other in terms of what's the best policy decision. So what would you say to that?
What you were saying about Common Core, I think it's a very complicated process. Common Core across the country consists of Pythagorean theorem and quadratic formulas and processes for reading different lengths of texts and analyzing them. And while those skills can be important depending on what you decide to do with your life, there are lots of skills that you will need in life that are separate from those and that are not dependent on what you do for a living, such as sexual health education.
Right.
No matter what occupation you have, whether you decide to go to college, whether you decide to do a craft trade, whether you decide to be a legendary mathematician and you need those math skills that you learned in elementary school, whether you decide to be a writer or whatever you end up deciding to do, yes, those basic skills that you learn in your earlier years can be helpful, but I'm sure that a lot of people who are much older than us can say, I don't remember a single thing about this math stuff, but they do remember, or they do still learn and remember the things that carry with them throughout their everyday to-day lives, such as sexual health education. So I think that even though it would be really difficult to create a Common Core standard, I think that it would be really hard to pass it, frankly, by Congress.
Right, yeah.
We have such a bipartisan country as a whole. And I think that there will be lots of lobbyists and people saying, we don't need this. Why do people need to get taught this? This is on whatever. This isn't how God wanted us to be, teaching children how to properly and safely have sex.
Yeah.
First of all, he would.
I would agree there. Yeah.
I'm just saying, no matter what you believe about God, I think that God would want you to be safe and healthy. So I think that that's
Agreed.
something that he would definitely want. So even though it would be difficult, I mean, we see our country changing already so rapidly. We are currently seeing, a healthcare for all bill being proposed in Congress, which would be amazing if we could get that passed. We would get potentially incredible amounts of comprehensive sexual education through that alone, which would be amazing for the country, and it would do so much good. So since there are all of these, major proposals by these people who are advocating for them and who are advocating for change, I think that, we could get change like this to occur, to create some kind of common forum that needs to be medically accurate and that needs to be taught throughout all levels of public education. I mean, I didn't see when I got my comprehensive education, comprehensive air quotes, in middle school, the only images that I ever was shown were diagrams of internal female sexual reproductive organs, which, while that's important, I don't think I saw a picture of a vulva or any kind of diagram of that until I was in high school, which is kind of terrifying since I have one. If I have one, we should know our bodies. We should understand them. It makes us all better humans, and understanding other people's bodies, it makes you easier to relate. It makes you, just even being educated. People might say like, oh, why would a child need to know that? Well, you never know. And if you are more educated, there is absolutely nothing wrong with being more educated on truth. You might say, why would they need to know that? What's the point? Why would I need to know Pythagorean theorem? What's the point? I can just look it up on Google. It's a double-edged sword. And I think that if we were to get that kind of federal forum and common core education for sexual health, I think that we would see statistics for STIs and STDs drop so quickly. Because the states that do require that and do have that, like you were saying, Connecticut has that, it's so low because people are educated and because they know how to properly have safe sex. So if we got that kind of federal common core, then I mean, it might be difficult to do, but it honestly starts with people like you and me. It starts with all of us emailing Congress people, talking to our senators, talking to our governors, talking to people higher up than us, and starting the conversation. Because if we don't start the conversation, then nothing's going to get done. So we have to. It starts with us.
That was so, like, thank you for giving that TED Talk. I am blown away.
My TED Talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, that was so cool. And the fact that you touched on, not only federal policy issues and the responsibility of lawmakers, but also our individual responsibility to educate ourselves, and if we can, to educate others. And I think that's what we're trying to do here.
That's what space is for. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what we're about. And absolutely trying to educate ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've learned so much just from doing this Vagilantes project. And
me too. Absolutely.
I've learned so much, and I've, it's just been an amazing experience. I'm really glad that we have this space to do this with people.
Wow, my actual heart just fell out of my rectum. Like, sorry, that's so graphic. I'm so sorry. That's what you get when you're a gastroenterologist's daughter. Anyways, eat Arby's. So, yes, if I may come back to reality, I told you about, some similar experiences that I've had with people coming up and actually like asking me sexual health questions. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I'll do my best. Like, let's pull up the CDC website and I'll tell you what I know.
Yeah.
But one thing that you said, and that I always encourage people to do too, is like, please talk to actual healthcare professionals. Please talk to your doctors. Please. Your general practitioner, anyone at a free clinic. If you need STI testing, Planned Parenthood will provide it either for low cost or usually for free. I know that our local one in Raleigh provides free STI testing. And then that actually leads me into a statistic that I wanted to talk about. This is from the American Sexual Health Association, which reports that, so even though young people, so people ages 15 to 24, account for half of new STI cases, a recent survey showed that only about 12% were tested for STIs in the last year. How insane is that?
That's wow.
Yeah. That's bananas. And then
bananas.
Yeah. And also, so the same survey reported that 1 in 2 sexually active persons will contract an STI by age 25. So 50%, roll the dice. And that's not to scare people, of course. Like, if you do catch a sexually transmitted infection, it's fine. You're not dirty. If you feel dirty, take a shower. Like, unless you're into that, I don't know. And so if we frame it as a public health issue, like, you're fine, you're going to be fine, and there are treatments for this. But I think prevention is absolutely, prevention is, the best cure in my unprofessional opinion. But I think, that's also based on the opinions of actual healthcare professionals. The total estimated direct cost of STIs annually in the U.S. is about $16 billion. Wow. And that's also from the ASHA. So I think some things that we can take away from this, in my opinion, are please get tested regularly. Yes. How often you get tested is, really specific to you and your body and your sexual life. But you probably want to get tested pretty regularly, because even though most infections are fairly harmless and have no major health consequences, a lot of them, like for HPV, for example, sometimes has like a pretty substantial incubation time, or symptoms don't show up, and then it turns out after a period of years, I've had people I know that this has happened to, and then you find out that, it's progressed to cervical cancer, or it's the most common, or vaginal cancer, or throat cancer. And then you have to, be treated for cancer, which sucks, yo. And so, yeah.
No.
I'm so sorry. And the fact that there's such a stigma around getting tested for STIs and being treated for STIs and talking about sex at all, I would say is absolutely, no statistics to back this up directly, but is absolutely a contributing factor in the, the spread of these infections. And the fact that people who contract them often, feel powerless or feel stigmatized, and don't really have the resources to, to deal emotionally and also to deal physically to prevent it from getting more serious.
And I think that it's really important that in order to reduce and eliminate this stigma and get rid of this idea that you're dirty and this idea that you are a horrible person or that you're disgusting, I think that it's to treat it, the way that we do that is to treat it as exactly what it is, which is a public health issue. There was this massive breakout of norovirus, and it was huge, and it swept through the entire school. And it's because, you're in close quarters and things like that. So if you were to get a norovirus, or if you were to catch a cold, or if you were to get athlete's foot from not wearing shower shoes or something like that, you wouldn't say, oh my goodness, I am a horrible, disgusting, dirty human being who has this terrible thing. I don't know. I shouldn't get this checked out. I should not get this taken care of because I don't want people to know, or because I don't want to have to go into a healthcare provider and have to tell them, that I got norovirus. You don't think about those kinds of things because there's no stigma around being sick, because it's not necessarily your fault. If you forget to wear shower shoes in the shower and you get athlete's foot, you don't sit there your entire life and say, oh my goodness, I'm a disgusting person who got athlete's foot. You go to the doctor and you get it treated, and then you remember to wear shower shoes. It's
hopefully
it should be the same thing with sexually transmitted infections and diseases.
Yes, absolutely. I really like that analogy of, treat sexual health issues like any other health issue. Objectively, we would hope, and scientifically. I think that is a perspective that I have absolutely learned over the years from kind of reading more and more about sex ed and sexual health, but that was not necessarily imparted to me by, say, the Catholic organizations I grew up in. And yeah, I think that that's absolutely a very, very valuable and important perspective if we actually want to make any kind of headway in this public health issue. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope that you will tune in next Saturday for the next episode of the VagCast, where we might even have 3 whole Vagilantes, the whole squad. Yeah, we're going to assemble the Avengers. And we might actually have decent quality microphones. So, we'll see. Yeah, we might get fancy next week.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Yo, yo, yiggity, yo. How do I stop recording? Oh, like that.